Shalom, welcome. So we left off at the second chapter of Esther, verse 7. We're going to start with verse 8 tonight. Tonight's learning, um, so uh, continue to push Shlema for complete healing for the people we mentioned tonight, and also myself. And the also tonight is my mother's yahrzeit, so Louis Nishmas Sorbas Yosef HaKohen. Okay, so
Rabbi,
yes.
I my my pardon my interruption,
Hmm.
but since I do not understand that much Hebrew, you just said something about your mother
Yeah, it's my mother's
and
anniversary of her passing, so we're sharing the merit of tonight's class with her.
okay, okay, all right, thank you.
Oh, no problem. Okay, so again, Book of Esther 2:8. We're using the main curriculum is the blue edition of the Art Scroll. Okay, and for color commentary, we have the Judaica Press, and the first Art Scroll book ever published, the Tanakh series, the white edition uh, of Esther. Okay.
I also, Rabbi, have the Toldodi on Megillus Esther, original comments, insights, and ideas on the book of Esther, adopted from the Shurim of Rabbi David Feinstein,
Oh,
Art
very nice.
Scroll Judica Classics.
Excellent. And do you also have these two volumes that I mentioned that I brought with me, the Judaica Press and the?
I don't have the Judaica Press.
Okay. All right.
He
And
has the art scroll.
you do have the Art Scroll. Okay. All right. So is there a portion of the Lecha Dodi that you really wanted to share, like one juicy tidbit you really wanted to cover, or are you going to research it while we're discussing?
I'm going to research it. If something pops out at me, I will share it with you.
Okay. All right. So what I did was with Judaica Press on chapters 2 and 3, there are very very interesting comments on a couple of the verses, and I bookmarked them. So when we get there, hopefully I'll remember and I can read it to you. Okay, but in the meantime, dun, 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 dun. Okay, so Esther chapter 2, verse 8 and onward, and Teresa is the first translator. Vihi bihi shama devar hamelech v'daso v'hi kavetz na'aros rabos el shushan habira el yad hegoy v'tilokach Esther el beis hamelech el yad hegai shomer hanashim v'titav hanara v'einav v'tisa chesed lefanov v'yvahel estamru keho ves menoseha l'seis Ves Shebahan Aros, Haruyos, Lasesla, Mi Base Hamelech, Vayeshaneha, Ves Narosel, Lato, Base Hanashim. Lohigida Esther Es Ama, Ves Moladata, Kimordchai Tziva Leha, Asher Lo Sagid. Okay, Teresa, please translate verses 8 through 10.
So it came to pass when the king's bidding and decree were announced, and when many young maidens were being brought together in Shushan, the capital, under the charge of Haggai, that Esther was taken to the king's palace under the charge of Haggai, guardian of the women. The girl was pleasing to his eyes, and she found favor before him. He friendly prepared her cosmetics. Oh, excuse me, hurriedly prepared her cosmetics and her allowance of delicacies to present to her along with the 7 attendants from the king's palace. And he transferred her and her maidens to the best quarters of the harem. Esther did not tell of her people or her kindred, for Malachi had instructed her not to tell.
Mordechai.
Excuse me, Mordecai. Who did
Right.
I?
Now, actually, there is a Gemara that discusses who is the identity of Malachi, the prophet, because Malachi in Hebrew is Malachim, my angel or my messenger. So is that a pseudonym or an actual name? So the first person they suggest Malachi was actually this other prophet. The first person they mention is Mordechai. So your mistake is that you actually quoted a Gemara in your mistake. That now Teresa's making mistakes at a pretty high level, guys.
That's right.
That's pretty amazing.
That is a pretty high level.
You just
Yeah.
never know what's going to come out of my mouth.
That's okay.
Okay, so and then that's a Gemara in Megillah. So when you're preparing for to teach a class like this, if you want to be comprehensive, not only you got to cover the commentaries and what midrashim you could, there's also Gemara, and the Gemara has lots of agada, lots of midrashic material. So that's a Gemara that talks about was Malachi Mordechai, and an alternative name for Malachi. Then another sage suggests maybe it was Ezra. And then, but finally, the Gemara concludes on the opinion Malachi was a separate prophet entirely. Yeah, so that's interesting.
Mhm.
And we see in the incidental discussions when the prophets were all visiting each other in the same generation, because in that generation we're talking about in the reign of Darius the Mede, the first Darius. So you had, I think, 6 prophets all prophesying at the same time. Very one of the most unique times in world history. 6 prophets at the same time. So it says there in that Gemara, it says Zechariah, Haggai, and Malachi. Then it says Daniel and Mordechai and Ezra. I think I quoted all the prophets right. So we see Malachi. If I'm quoting that correctly, God knows. Hopefully I can recall where I looked that one up. Then so there's a Gemara like that. Hopefully I quoted it correctly. I'm not trying to make up a new Gemara. So I believe there it does mention the prophets separately by name, so therefore it's hard to say that they were the same person. So in other words, another proof that the conclusion of the Gemara that talks about Malachi as a separate prophet is the accurate opinion. Okay, so all right. Okay, so we just finished the verse that Esther was still concealing her background. As we learned in the intro in the art scroll, this is in both the white edition and the blue edition. So then it does say that Esther, if she was the wife of Mordecai, by keeping the secret of her birth, she would no longer have to be a person who has to be willing to kill themselves if to avoid a desecration to God's name, Chil Hashem. So because she didn't reveal that she was Jewish, she didn't have to protect God's honor by avoiding any appearance of adultery. So nobody knew that she was a married woman. Now, somebody asked a question, and somewhere it actually explicitly answers that that they knew that they were going to collect married women anyway, so there was no point to tell them that she was married. It wouldn't save her. Just that news. It wasn't like Avimelech's, in Genesis.
Okay. May I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay. Uh, and this is largely due to my own ignorance, is that why would they collect married women? That's something that I'm like, huh? Wait a minute, these women are already spoken for and married. Why would you collect them?
Oh, Mark, your morality is showing again. So,
Well, it's well, I will not apologize.
very good. Okay, but you're assuming they read Tanakh and are living by its principles. You see, you're being a good guy, and a good guy would couldn't can't even really understand that. Uh, but they would there's an accepted practice even in Talmudic law that if a king absolutely needs a certain property, he can rule that it's his. And by Talmudic law, they have to give financial compensation. But in the ancient kingdoms, they used to take land, whether or not compensation was involved. Everybody agreed to, the king's allowed to take land of anyone. Uh, you know, it's a wise policy in addition to being a just policy to give compensation if the king needs a certain piece of real estate. But the one absolute rule was the king has a right to take land if he so chooses. And we see in the Ten Commandments, right? Uh, what does it say about in the Ten Commandments? We can take a minute to look at that. All right, Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20, this is the 10th commandment, 14. You shall not covet your fellow's house, you shall not covet your fellow's wife, his manservant, his maidservant, his ox, his donkey, or nor anything that belongs to your fellow. That's Exodus 20, 14, 10th commandment. So the property is mentioned for the wife. So if the property can be taken by a king, it was easy for the less moral people to say, certainly, Kal v'chomer, the wife could be taken by the king.
Okay, but the and people, please excuse me. I But however, that would fall under adultery,
Uh,
and
yes, true.
and
Uh,
it's like, wait a minute, this ain't adding up. Uh,
Right.
there's
So,
something.
but you see, it's like using the Torah logic against something even Ben Noach would be prohibited in it. Even from before giving the Torah, people knew you couldn't do that. You couldn't just substitute wives. In fact, that was the practice of the generation before the flood. That people kept swapping their wives around. Uh,
Oh,
so that everybody knew it's like a basic human morality thing. You can't just swap around wives. But well, actually,
no, sir.
everybody outside of France, maybe. No offense. Okay, so but you know, eh, so but again, this is an example of hypocrisy. When people don't want to listen to God, they find a way to do it over the course of several categories, not just one sin, but many sins. They don't want to kill, quote unquote, but if they have to conquer the world, so everybody in their path is in trouble.
Okay,
Like if the Crusaders were only interested in fighting the Islam, but they happen to come across some Jewish communities in the meanwhile, they have a right in their minds to attack the Jews as well, and that's what they
okay.
did.
All right.
So,
I don't. I don't want to get us too far off track of what we're doing right
no, no, it's
now.
good, it's good. But okay, so the Ten Commandments in Deuteronomy, okay, that's in chapter 5 of Deuteronomy. What does it say there? That's That's chapter 5, verse 18. You shall not covet your fellow's wife. You should not desire your fellow's house, his field, his slave, his maid servant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to your fellow. So here it puts the wife before the fellow's house. So God knew what the Persians would do, and He answered them, and they would say, well, obviously, Exodus chapter 20 says the house before the wife. So therefore, if you could take property, certainly you could take a wife. But here it breaks it down by reversing the order in Deuteronomy. The wife is put first, not the house. So God already knew how to answer people, and if people want to serve God, they're going to serve God. If they don't want to, they're going to look for the most convenient excuse, which of course doesn't actually um, hold water if you were to actually do an analysis. So I'll just quote a verse from uh, from the prophets. Uh, this is in the 12 prophets in Hosea. I'll find the exact page in the Art Scroll Stone Edition. Okay, this would be on page 1348, 1349 in the Art Scroll Stone Edition Tanakh, bilingual. Michacham Viovin Ela Navon V'Yedaim Yesharim Darchei Hashem V'Tzadikim Yeluchuvam Ufoshim Yikal Shaluvam. Who is wise and will understand these things? Who is understanding and will know them? For the ways of Hashem are straight. The righteous will walk in them, and sinners will stumble over them. So, and you notice the popular Ten Commandments that everyone quotes is the one in Exodus, right? So, but it doesn't mean the one in Deuteronomy disappeared. Hopefully, when people quote the one in Exodus, they're trying to get just the first one God mentioned. So, okay, we'll publish that one. They're not trying to exclude the value of a wife and place her below the value of property. But when the founding fathers of the United States wrote and based on the philosophies at the time, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, and that's based on the philosophy of life, liberty, and property. And so, from the perspective of property, in that mindset of they would have thought of the 10th commandment is a discussion about property. So therefore, they're all equal. But I mean, hopefully, a person values their wife more. A man values his wife more than his property. A woman values her husband more than her property. That's the Torah ideal. So why would the house be put first in Exodus then, right? Doesn't that set up for people to value property more than the spouse? Well, the average family and historically would have many children and two parents. So therefore, we're talking about numbers of the family. There's a lot of people in the family, and they need a place to live, right? They need shelter. That's a basic thing. So protecting the shelter of the family, which includes many people, the needs of the many are mentioned first in Exodus. But the fact that these are interchangeable means, it doesn't mean that the property comes first. It as a choice, like a couple that never had kids, for example, it should be obvious the property does not equal the wife. You understand?
I do, Rabbi, and uh, something that I wanted to
No, it's very nice, Mark, that you pointed out the moral discrepancy between what the Ahasuerus regime did and the not just Torah ideals, but just basic human common sense since the time of the flood. When the world is literally thrown into catastrophe over this kind of behavior. So maybe it's good to avoid it.
and it's something about it, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one is is
It's
something that I caught. If I'm reading too much into this, then I apologize. But it would it seemed to me that it would also, what you were mentioning, is that the needs of the many would outweigh the needs of the few or the one.
Well, I tell you, my saintly mother, whose yahrzeit is tonight. So I recall when we were suffering financially one year in a really difficult financial situation. So she went the year without buying any clothing whatsoever for herself, and she used the money she would have used for her own clothing to buy toys for the kids. So she put the needs of the many before the needs of the wife herself. But
Okay.
that was her choice. The husband should say, well, if you make a really good pot roast, maybe we can take care of you more than the hedges tonight. It was,
Okay. 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 All right.
have a little more respect and stuff like that. I mean,
Okay. I was thinking of the many. Uh,
right. But it's just like, for example, what if there's a severe thunderstorm, right? So little children could get extremely ill if they're soaked all night in the cold weather and rain. So it could be a matter of life and death for the children. So therefore, that's why I believe God put Exodus the property first. But again,
Thank you, Robert.
in in
I,
in a in a just a everything being equal, only two people in the household, the husband and the wife, the property it should always be second, right?
the wife should always be first.
Correct. And
Okay.
I think that's why in Deuteronomy it's reversed.
Okay.
It's the same law. The,
Well, not only that, God is also first.
well, yes, God is the first and the last from our perspective and the perspective of the angels. But from God's perspective, the needs of the humans comes first. Because if a person never offered one sacrifice to God, he'll never go home hungry for that. But if a person misses even one meal, they start to feel hungry. So humans have such great needs, and God doesn't have any need. So therefore, God Himself prioritizes the needs of the humans. So even though God's glory fills the universe, nevertheless, from God's perspective, a kindness to another human being is the greatest way to serve Him. Generally speaking, if a person does it in a perverse way, so then it's destroying the good deed. All right, so let's keep the Torah's morals and ethics as we continue with our reading of Megillah Esther, the book of Esther. Okay, verse 11. V'chol yom v'yom, Mordechai mishalech lifnei chatzar beis hanashim, l'das shalom Esther u'ma yaseh ba, u'v'hagia tor na'ara v'na'ara lavo el hamelech Achashverosh, miketz hayos la kedas hanashim shneim asar chodesh, ki ken yimelu yemei merukehan, shisha chadashim b'shemen hamor v'shisha chadashim b'basamim u'v'sam rukei hanashim. V'zeh hanara ba'a el hamelech Es kol asher tomar yinosein la, lavo ima mi beis hanashim ad beis hamelech. Okay, so please translate verses 11 through 13. Teresa.
Day after day, Mordecai would walk about in front of the courtyard of the harem and learn about Esther's well-being and what would become of her. Now, when each woman's turn arrived to come to the king Ahasuerus, after having been treated according to the law prescribed for women for 12 months, for so was the prescribed length of their anointing accomplished, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and feminine cosmetics. And when the girl came in this manner to the king, she was given whatever she required to accompany her from the harem to the king's palace.
Yeah, let's read the comments on let's see, on verse 12. Russell or Teresa?
12 months to be sure that none of the girls were diseased. Ahasuerus ordered that 12 months should elapse, since symptoms of illnesses would surface during that time.
Manos Halevi. Yeah, so in other words, the harem was not just figuratively speaking. He actually had many concubines that he had relations with. And it was there were two factors involved. One was that they had many months to mix some of these exotic oils that they came up with, and number two, they wanted to make sure there was no form of venereal disease or any other kind of uh, um, intimately transmitted diseases, and so that is the situation. As far as the harem was real, he had more than one wife, but he only had two queens, Vashti and Esther. And the sages teach there was a 3-year gap in between. And the sages praise Achashverosh for not just elevating any any woman, so to speak, there who didn't deserve it. So he waited 3 years until he found Esther, who was a brilliant person in addition to everything else. So even though he was very you know into his animalistic self, he nevertheless he put the needs of the kingdom. He didn't give honor to a woman until she was worthy to be a queen. Vashti was at least the daughter of Belshazzar, right? So she was royalty. And Esther, he didn't know that she was actually a descendant of King Saul. She was also royalty, but he was looking for someone who could act regal, and it just so happens, yeah, yeah, right. She was a good. She carried down the hereditary nobility of her forefather, Saul, and she perhaps that was part of the reason why besides the needs of the generation, but the fact that she had like a regal bearing, even though she on purpose was the only woman in the when they were picking the ladies, she's the only one who on purpose did not put on makeup. Nevertheless, she was still attractive because of the way she was behaving. Also as a prophet, she was very wise and humble and modest. So whereas other women were hoping he would notice her so she could be rich, right? Esther was not trying to get his attention. And of course, psychologically speaking, people are sometimes attracted to that which they can't have. So her demureness was off the charts compared to everybody else there. And in a way, because she didn't want to marry Achashverosh, that's why she ended up marrying Achashverosh. So, but it was the needs of the generation. And in that generation, Remember, from the time of Mount Sinai until the generation of Mordechai and Esther, the Jews had only accepted the written Torah. They said, okay, if we can, we'll apply the oral Torah. But after these events, in this generation, they accepted the oral Torah as well. Without the oral Torah, for example, how do you make a pair of tefillin? It doesn't say that these details in the Torah of Moses. So without the oral Torah, you can't even function to do the basic laws of the Torah. So it's people ended up having to do certain oral Torah things, but if somebody decided that they didn't want to listen to a particular oral Torah, there was no way of policing it in the Jewish community, because nobody, as a group, accepted it. It was only like personal customs of some families who were really religious. But after this, in the gratitude of that generation, ever since then, Jews were also committed to the oral Torah, and that's a game changer. Russell, I remember you telling me something about the oral Torah. You found that very fascinating um, when you're on your initial path of study of Torah. How did you describe that, Russell?
I don't. I don't remember exactly how I described it, Rabbi.
Oh,
But
okay, but well, it was good for you. It's something about the oral Torah being like it answered a lot of your questions that nobody else answered for you,
oh yeah,
right?
because yeah, absolutely, it fills in the gaps, and I'm just of the
Exactly.
mindset that we can't know the very simple meaning of the text if we don't have the oral Torah or knowledge behind it. It's fascinating just reading through the commentaries
Yeah.
as we've been studying the Tanakh here,
Mhm.
and the wealth of knowledge that it adds, and it if you pay attention to the commentaries, it'll answer a lot of your questions that it has.
Exactly. And so, in other words, before this generation of Esther and Mordechai, the world was not as we know it. It was a time of like a wild, wild west as far as the oral Torah goes. You know, we don't fully appreciate that. It's just that, uh, to become a prophet and everything like that, obviously they had to be saintly with the oral Torah. Now, as I mentioned previously, Mordechai was one of the founders, if not the major founder, the first founder of the Anshe Knesset Hagadola, Men of the Great Assembly, which ended with the first stage of the Mishnah period. So the Talmud is a direct result of this generation of Mordechai and Esther, where they accepted the oral Torah, and therefore they created a assembly whereby any questions of the Torah could be answered through there. You understand? So, in other words, in their day, they were creating a way to protect the orthodoxy of oral Torah, because before they didn't really have to police it, since only really prophets and saintly people would keep the oral Torah. But starting then, they had to start to police it. And after the generations of the prophets, among the starters of the Men of the Great Assembly was Mordechai and Ezra and other prophets, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. So among them, they were just in the first generation. But then after the end of the prophets, so their students are called in the language of the book of Kings. They would be called Bnei Nevi'im, the disciples of the prophets. So the first sages of the Mishnah were the disciples of the prophets, and that's all occurring uh, starting from the book of Esther onward. Very exciting. As far as anybody who maybe they spent years studying Talmud or Mishnah or Medrash. It's just an exciting moment in Tanakh. Right here is the turning point where it went from a a sign of piety to baseline religiosity, to accept the oral Torah and try to keep it. It's an extremely fascinating moment in Jewish history. Possibly the greatest moment between the revelation at Sinai and entering the Holy Land, and then the acceptance of the oral Torah in the days of Mordechai and Esther, and then the coming of a Mashiach. So, it's one of the great moments in Jewish history. And thank God we're now at the center of it here in the book of Esther, seeing how first the nation has to survive so there can be a nation that accepts the oral Torah. So let's check out how that continues to unravel before us. Okay. All right, verse 14 onward. Berav hi ba'al va'avoker hi shava al beis hanashim sheni el yad sha'ash gaz saris hamelech shomer hapilagshim lo savo od el hamelech ki'im chavetz ba hamelech v'nikra v'shem. Okay, let's translate verse 14.
In the evening she would come, and in the morning she would return to the second harem in the charge of Shashagis, the king's chamberlain, guardian of the concubines. Excuse me. She would never again come to the king unless the king desired her, and she was summoned by name.
Yeah, let's look at the verse 14 to understand this. Please use the quote from Ibn Ezra al-Shif and 14.
The commentary?
Yeah.
Okay. The second harem, even if Ahasuerus rejected her as king, it was considered disrespectful for a woman who had lived with the king to return to her earlier life and marry another man. The women were returned to a harem and remained there for the rest of their lives as concubines.
Okay, so right. So in other words, they in some cases, some of these women waited a whole year to have just one chance to become one of the king's favorites. Otherwise, she was relegated to the second house of the second harem, and that house they may never ever love another man unless the king happens to have a whim for them. So they were they were basically condemned to a life without any man by threat of king's guards. But they could live in a palace with riches and delicious food. And in the context of that part of history, some women were actually happy for that. Remember, a lot of women couldn't get a lot of jobs. They would have to get married just to be able to survive. So just having a roof over their heads was a basic goal of women in that generation. So, but I mean, to me it sounds like a cruel existence. But I could understand how some women, in the context of not being able to get a job anywhere else, that may be like they may even be happy about such a horrible fate. In that context. God forbid. But thank God, it's really beautiful. You look at the oral Torah to discuss about marriage from a Jewish perspective. It's beautiful, right? And there's discussion in the Gemara. Shakadu chachamim tukanos benos Yisrael. The sages of Israel were diligent for the betterment of the daughters of Israel. So just an entirely different discussion in the oral Torah and Talmud. So it's but again, in the historical context, even though it may sound like a horrible fate, I mean, they were living in a regal palace, regal clothes, and great food, and lots of girlfriends. So I mean, You,
they
you
were
can imagine.
cheating on their first wives. That's
So
stupidity.
we're talking about the girls now. You can imagine for them without the ability to own their own farms and stuff like that, like men could do. Uh, in their context, it's not necessarily the Gehenna, the purgatory we may think of, but I like the Jewish way better. Let me put it that
Yeah,
way.
because
Okay.
they would never be able to have children or anything like that. So that's the bad
Ru-
part about it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if they had a child and the king's record did not recall that she was called up, so that could be a death sentence. How did she get pregnant?
Yeah.
Yeah. So but again, being fruitful and multiply means that people are fruitful and multiply. But as far as you know, this is one of the hidden mercies of God is that he knew that there would be generations and cultures where they weren't fair to women. So if a woman was commanded directly with being fruitful and multiply, so then she could feel even more emotional pain from such a situation. But as the Magen Avraham explains, the commentary of Magen Avraham, he explains it's not from Peru Uruvu being fruitful and multiply, but Isaiah 45 Yashva Haaretz to that the world should be civilized and settled. So that is where a woman has an obligation in Tanakh to procreate. But that again, any law not given at Sinai is at a rabbinical level. So there's no Torah level violation if a woman was in a harem and she wasn't allowed to have children. So at least from that perspective, that's a source of comfort. But God is more demanding of men. Even a Ben Noach, obviously, God commanded Adam and Noah to be fruitful and multiply. So it's not just about those who accepted the covenant at Sinai. Okay, verse 15. Vagia Tor Esther Bas Avichail, Dod Mordechai, Asher לקח לו לבס לבוא אל המלך לא ביקשה דבר כי אם אס אשר יאמר הגי סריס המלך שומר הנשים ותהי אסתר נושאס חן בעיני כל רואיה. ותילקח אסתר אל המלך אחשוורוש על בייס מלכוסו בחודש העשירי הוא חודש טבעס בשנס שבע למלכוסו. ויאהב המלך את אסתר מכל הנשים ותישא חן וחסד לפניו מכל הבסולות, וישם כסר מלכוס בראשה, וימליכיה תחת ושתי. Okay, please translate through verse 17.
Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace on the 10th month, which is the month of Tebes.
Did we cover 15? Could you translate from 15? Right.
And
I think
no,
we
I'm
translated
sorry.
14.
I apologize.
Okay.
Now when the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, uncle of
Abichail, yeah.
Mordecai, who had adopted her as his daughter, to come to the king, she requested nothing except that which Haggai, the king's chamberlain, guardian of the women, had advised. Esther would find favor in the eyes of all who saw her. Esther was
Yeah.
taken to
Yeah, please continue, yes.
Okay. Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebes, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the women, and she found more favor and kindness before him than all the maidens, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen in place of Vashti.
As we covered in the last week, the Esther and Halacha and in the overview, Esther, a forlorn wife. So she she probably was his Mordechai's wife, not his daughter. So the language here uh, calls her his daughter because since the scroll was written down by Mordechai, so therefore he wanted to conceal his erstwhile wife's for her honor's sake that she was a married woman uh, with someone else. So to avoid any disgrace, because Esther was also a prophet of God, you don't want to describe her publicly as someone with a difficult situation like that. But in the oral Torah, I mean, it comes right out. Now, the advantage of it not being in Tanakh is that people who don't study the oral Torah will not assume that. They're going to assume, oh, she was a daughter, or she was he was being at least a foster father to her, and therefore there won't be any second thoughts against her. But someone who knows oral Torah also knows that if somebody is forced, as discussed in the five books of Moses in the verses, it actually discusses that. If someone's forced, it's not considered any kind of an adultery. However, towards the end of the story, it's no longer forced, and so what that means is eventually she can never return back to Mordechai even after Achashverosh passed away. So that sad part of the story continued even after Achashverosh died. But um, she was a cause to save Israel, and she became the mother of the next king of the empire. Darius the Persian was the son of Achashverosh and Esther. So now, as far as the Persian Empire goes, let's again look at that list in the back. Um, okay, it's not necessarily here, but okay, let me get it from the art scroll on the Tanakh here. Mhm. Yeah. So on page 2027, the Stone Edition, Appendix 8, Appendix A, Timeline 5, the Babylonian exile. Yeah. So the first king of the Persian Media Empire was Darius the Mede. The next was Cyrus the Great. The next ruler. This chart doesn't include the Cambyses who ruled for less than a year. Then there was Achashverosh, then Darius the Persian. Okay. But Darius the Mede, if you recall from the book of Daniel, what was his father's name? Daniel chapter 9, verse 1. Bishnas achas l'Daryavish ben Achashverosh mizera modai asher hamlach al malchus kastim. In the first year of Darius, the son of Achashverosh, of the offspring of Medea, who was made king over the kingdom of the Chaldeans. Okay, so Darius was the Mede was from Medea. Cyrus was Persian. Ahasuerus was, remember, the father of Darius. What was his name? Ahasuerus. So the name Ahasuerus is Median. So Darius the Persian, his father, was he a Persian or Median? So Darius the Mede's father, Darius the Persian's father, Ahasuerus, was Median. His mother Esther was a Persian Jew. So Darius the Persian is Persian, from nationality speaking, in merit of Esther, not of Ahasuerus, because Ahasuerus, he had the name Ahasuerus, which we see from Darius and Daniel chapter 9 verse 1. Ahasuerus is a Chaldean name. So Ahasuerus was a Chaldean, Median,
Mhm.
uh, who who took over the empire after Cyrus the Great, but his son was called Persian because his mother was Persian. So
Darius would have been Jewish, wouldn't he?
yes, he was Jewish also, but he didn't have a tribe because his father was not from a tribe.
Mm.
Yeah,
But he had a tribe, but because his mother Queen Esther was
so I mean
his
that
mother Queen Esther was from Biyamin, but
right.
Shevet Biyamin, but he was too far away from it.
No, it's not. It goes by the father of the tribes.
No,
So
it goes by the mom of the
no,
tribe.
no, no, no. But no,
His
no.
father
It
is
goes by the
Ahasuerus.
mom, the religion. It goes by the father of the tribe. Okay, that's how it works.
Seriously.
Yes, like Mashiach ben David, the father is forefathers through the father's side, could be from the tribe of have to be from the tribe of Judah, but his mother could be any kind of Jewish, even if his mother was a convert to Judaism. That's okay. Just like King David's great grandmother Ruth was a convert to Judaism. Okay, so Baruch Hashem. But it's just fascinating, and it's important to understand that, especially if somebody read the book of Daniel without commentary. Darius ben Achashverosh. So you're talking about Esther's son, right? No, Darius ben Achashverosh was the name of Darius the Mede, but it was also the name of Darius the Persian. That's why they're called Darius the Mede and Darius the Persian, because they had the exact same name. Their father was Achashverosh, and their name was Darius. Isn't that good to know? But if you look in the annals of ancient Persian history, they both will be described by the both Ahasuerus from the Book of Esther and Darius, son of Esther, are both called Artaxerxes or Artaxerxes. Okay, so and as I gave my supposition that is a Chaldean name referring to emperor. That's why they both had the same exact name, in even though it's clearly talking about two different people. Okay, so but now you understand why uh, they're being described in Chaldean terms, because Chaldeans were the foundation of the Median Empire. So what's a Persian king, Darius, the son of Esther, being described in the history books as Artaxerxes, which is a Chaldean name, right? So that's because he was actually Chaldean on his father's side. It's fascinating, but it's important to make note of that, so that you don't try to change the dating on Daniel's prophecy. When we say Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, we are not talking about Esther's son. Okay. remember in chapter 4, in the oral Torah, there'll be discussion. Did Daniel die in chapter 4 of this book of the book of Esther?
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, certainly it cannot be that we're talking about Darius, the son of Esther, the Persian, because Daniel would not be alive according to that theory. Now, even if Daniel wasn't killed in a plot by Haman, which seems to be the majority of view of the Talmud, and which I clearly hold by. So then, even so, it looks like Daniel just passed away from old age around sometime during the reign of Ahasuerus. Before uh, people were sent to say they could go and rebuild the temple because who went? It was Ezra and Zerubbabel. Not it doesn't mention Daniel. And now, of course, it doesn't mention Mordecai either in the book of Ezra, but it doesn't have to because he's from the tribe of Benjamin. But Daniel was the next in line to be king in his generation. When Daniel was already getting elderly and too old without a massive miracle to really become the king. So therefore, that's when Zerubbabel rose up and became the next potential Mashiach of his generation. And that happened just a year or two before the book of Ezra. Okay, so God willing, our plan is to try to cover the book of Ezra next. But you see, it's really cool if you go in the order of history. So now, I mean, the history is confusing enough because of all the alternate history books of from outside sources. But by learning this in historical progression, we're starting to make sense not only from a Torah perspective, but also historical concepts. Okay, so we read up through verse 17, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so let's read the commentary in verse 17.
Let me turn the page back. More than all the women, as in more than the other wives already in his harem. According to the Midrash, married women too were brought to the king. Therefore, according to the rabbis who maintained that she was Mordecai's wife, her claim that she was a married woman would not have spared her from being consecrated.
Conscripted,
Conscripted.
ordered into the army, so to speak.
Then all of the maidens, although other maidens were waiting their turn in the harem, once Asherus saw Esther, he instantly crowned her as his king without bothering to see the other candidates.
His queen, right?
I mean,
No, yeah. I mean, obviously, in today's world, the queen is the king. So,
he
who's
crowned
the boss
her.
of the house? The husband is, unless you have to ask the wife. So, and then if the husband's in the same room with the wife, then everybody agrees it's the wife. But if the husband's by himself, he has the right to say that he's the king. So that's the custom in Western civilization currently, apparently. So
with Esther being
Even
crowned
today,
I'm joking.
even
I heard
today,
a
Abba,
video of one lady that was talking, and she said that it's the man that's the bossy boots. She
like
was
imagine
from
if I
England,
was king,
so she
I
said
would
that.
say that's my wife. So
Okay, so anyone
yeah.
who says it's the man is the bossy boots or something to that effect has already she's already given up ground and let him be the boss.
But wouldn't I say
But
the same thing to my wife?
there is, I mean,
But
look, for example, in sitcoms,
you're not even listening.
You start with the listening, sir, and teach me how to do that. As a student, that's your superpower. Okay.
Really?
Yes, teach the teacher how to listen by showing a good example.
Showing a good example of how to be good to your wife, not cheat on her. That's one thing not to
Oh,
do.
that's a
That's
good
one
thing
thing to
too,
do.
right?
Not to cheat on your wife.
Oral Torah is all the way with you, man. Okay.
Don't desire another secondary wife for yourself more than your first wife. That's wrong.
Well, it depends how wrong
That's
it is.
inhumane.
It depends on the generation. In Yaakov Jacob's generation, it was no problem marrying more than one wife. Obviously nowadays, there could be legal ramifications if somebody tried to do it. But the idea is that for example, it's sitcom comedies of the 50s and 60s. So the wife would make mistakes and the husband would correct her and teach her, patiently guiding the family towards the American dream. And then there was like this mid period, I don't know, 70s and 80s, I guess. But starting in the 90s, you started to have more and more situations where the joke was the husband was childlike and the authoritarian in the house of the comedies. uh I didn't see every comedy, but I mean,
You gotta be kidding me.
but the mother was the authoritarian and therefore the leader of the house from the perspective of Hollywood. So I'm just saying, from that perspective.
Okay, Rabbi, I have a question.
Okay, but let's talk about Torah instead of Hollywood. Yes.
Okay. So with Esther, he instantly crowned her as queen without bothering to see the other candidates. Were the other candidates, were they released or did they still have to stay there anyway, even though they'd never been to see the king?
Well, okay, so there's a mitzvah to judge people favorably but that applies to the righteous. To somebody who's maybe righteous, maybe not righteous, you could judge them favorably, but be cautious to make sure they're not going to take advantage of you. To someone who's wicked, there's no obligation to judge favorably. So Achashverosh willingly gave over to the idea of killing the genocide of the entire race of people. So he's not one of the good guys of history.
Right.
Uh, uh, you know, Even though he's the father of the righteous Darius the Persian. Uh, so so therefore, we could assume that he did whatever was most self-serving. Therefore, he would probably keep them uh, unless he rejected them. But as long as they were not, uh, there's no consummation of the relationship, they had a technical right to be released. So he may have kept them another year just in case he changed his mind and then release them. Something to that effect. Because again, they had a 1 year waiting period before they were deemed disease free and oiled up. As far as all of these makeup, mascara stuff they were doing back then. So I assume it was more likely they would try to keep them a little bit longer in case there was a change of mind. But it's also possible that they occasionally surprise you with some nice laws. Just like, again, Cyrus the Great said that the Jews should rebuild the temple, and then Ahasuerus stopped it, right? So, and that we'll read about in the Book of Ezra. The first few years of the Book of Ezra are actually coinciding with this reign of Ahasuerus, and then Darius, the Persian, rises up in the middle of the Book of Ezra, and that's where Ezra leads the rebuilding of the temple. Okay. So, remember the commentary says Achashverosh loved Esther as much as he had loved Vashti, according to Alshich. And according to our scroll, no longer did he feel remorse over capriciously executing Vashti. Okay. So his mourning period, right? His mourning period and remorse for loss of Vashti was only because she was beautiful and he deprived himself of her, not really for her.
He no longer had any more love for Vashti.
No, the problem is he had love for Vashti, but he was drunk, and Memuchan, who it probably was Haman, took advantage of that and tried to get rid of her, and succeeded. But the Talmud says that in some ways Vashti was possibly more beautiful than Esther, uh, but uh, but it was only a physical beauty. Esther had deep down beauty, her grace and everything was she had layers to her beauty, Esther. So she was overall more beautiful, and that's important with prophecy. Whether or not a woman is uh, completely beautiful, she has to have some sort of beauty. It doesn't necessarily have to be physical comeliness. It could be like grace or other types of beauty. And according to one opinion in the Medrash Rabbah on Esther, that well, I think it's also mentioned maybe in the Gemara Megillah. So Esther may have had a like a greenish complexion. Now, when you see a quote like that, again, in the context, it appears to be this is only talking about when she had her 3 days of fasting, right? And she looked like somebody who was just released from a concentration camp, dehydrated after 3 days. So and no food, couldn't. The Gemara said the Chazal, said that she couldn't, she didn't even lift up her head at first. She was so weakened by the fast. So at that point, maybe she looked a little greenish, but there's no question she had a certain amount of beauty. In fact, there's a Gemara that discusses the prophets. The prophets all had to have some sort of beauty or handsome trait to be considered to be eligible for prophecy. Now, again, there's many forms of beauty. There could be we already spoke about grace, not just physical attractiveness of the appearance. There could be a beautiful form and not just a beautiful face, right? So there could be different aspects of the physical. There could be a beautiful voice, not just a beautiful outward appearance. Um, and there's other forms of beauty. Also, it's another medrash discussing it. So, Baruch Hashem, yeah, oral Torah is amazing, and it gives all these secrets. But part of the reason it's not in a written in a like in chapter after chapter in a logical way, everything discussed in the same Gemara or everything like that, is to make it harder for people of a different religion to try to reinterpret the oral Torah according to their ways. For example, if someone wants to find out the laws about a woman who, when she gets married and on her wedding night, and what to do if she has, a period, does there have to be separation? So there could be three different Gemaras one would have to consult to find the law. They may have to go to for example, the Gemara Kesuvos, the Gemara Kedushin, and the Gemara in Nida. And the Gemara Kesuvos and Kedushin are in the Ezra and the Seder Nashim, in the tractate orders of the Mishnah called the women. But but the laws of Nida, of menstruation, would be found actually in the law in the Seder Taros, the Mishnaic order of purity. So just to get one answer, it's possible a person would have to search different parts of the Talmud. Now, in every generation, there's always been Jewish scholars, great scholars in every generation, and the great scholars know all of this stuff by heart. So if you go to Rav Moshe Feinstein, And I remember seeing something like this when I was learning from Rav Belsky, Chaim Yisrael Belsky. So when someone comes into the room, the person after person ask different questions from different categories of halacha, and the Rav is answering every halacha clearly, and he's quoting like obscure commentaries on a Gemara that quotes another Gemara that quotes a commentary in that Gemara, and he's quoting it by heart. So the great scholars have all of this down pat. I'm struggling just with Tanakh, but we each do what we can do, right? So, but the main thing is this: is that there's always been God has always provided scholars in Israel, and the oral Torah has always been with Israel. And for the needs of the exile, the oral Torah had to be put in kind of like in sometimes almost like a secret code, like the Book of Daniel was told explicitly put in the code. Now it's a kal v'chomer, a logical inference. If the Book of Daniel was told put this in the code, and uh, it was allowed to be shared with the nations, who would try to make their own monotheistic religions, and God knew this was going to happen. Certainly, the the soul of the Tanakh, the oral Torah, would have to be guarded even further. So therefore, you have this diversification of the locations to find the answers to certain specific questions. So, but it's just a consequence of the exile. Now, once we have the fulfillment of the prophecies in Tanakh, where everyone follows the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they all follow the same light as Isaiah described, light unto the nations, and it's just one light, and on that day, Hashem echad Shemochad, God will be one and His name one. God is always one, but people will recognize it. So when there's only one God and there's no way to make a different religion, so then it's okay for the religion to become simple. So in other words, the difficulty in exile was two layered. It was not just that the exile was difficult and certain things had to be hidden and in plain sight, but it's also that to understand the Talmud nowadays, you need to be a greater scholar than it'll take to understand the Talmud in after Mashiach comes, because the Talmud can be reorganized into a simple to follow book, more closely related perhaps to the Shulchan Aruch, or also if you could do a comparison of the Babylonian Talmud to the Jerusalem Talmud is more streamlined, like a regular book of halacha, and whereas the Babylonian Talmud is the one that's really complicated with all these. You have to go here and there to figure out the actual law. So the structure of the Babylonian Talmud, it may be retained as a academic tool to keep people on their toes and become great scholars, but we already see that, like, for example, the Shulchan Aruch, the codes of the Jewish law, already is starting to the simplification of God's oral Torah. But I think it's going to be even much more simplified and easy to follow after Mashiach comes, for the basic fact that there's no more concern another religion is going to try to take and pervert the Torah of God. And I mean we see the we see from some of the misquotes from Tanakh in the King James Bible, how even something revealed Torah, everybody has it, access to a Tanakh or a King James Bible, right? Even revealed Torah has so many misquotes in the time of exile, where there's no centralized halachic authority in the Holy Temple. If you recall, the Holy Temple would have a Lishkas Hagazis, the the uh, the chamber of hewn stone where the Sanhedrin would meet. And Deuteronomy 17, that would be where people would go to the chamber of hewn stone to resolve um, any of their difficulties. So without the capacity to have this free discussion and dialogue on oral Torah without fear of it being uh, tried to be controlled from a different place, so then the oral Torah has to be protected. That's the main thing. Even if great scholarship is only found in certain sectors of the people, at least people could find one of these great scholars and ask a complicated question. But after the exile is over, then and there's no more competition towards trying to make up a different religion. So then making things simple is, I think, the next logical course. So that's my understanding, is that it'll become very simple to follow the oral Torah as far as the laws. Okay. Verse 18 in the book of Esther, chapter 2. V'yasamach mishte gadol l'chol sarav v'avadav es mishte Esther v'hanacha lamedinos asa v'yitin mas es kiyad hamelech v'hikavetz b'sulos shenis Mordechai yoshev b'shar hamelech. Ein Esther magedes moladta vad v'es ama kasher tziva aleha Mordechai v'es Mamar Mordechai Esther Osa Kasher Hayisa Amna Ito. Can you please translate through verse 20? 18, 19, 20.
Then the king made a great banquet for all the officers and his servants. It was Esther's banquet, and he proclaimed an amnesty for the providences and gave gifts worthy of the king's hand. And when the maidens were gathered together the second time, and Mordecai sat at the king's gate. Did you say through 19 or 20?
20.
Esther still told nothing of her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had instructed her. For Esther continued to obey Mordecai just as when she was reared by him.
Okay.
Sorry, Abba.
Okay, so now if she was reared by him, how is it possible to interpret it, outside of the Peshut Shamikra, that she was a wife to him, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the word for reared used here is amna, and the root word of that is amen, which is related to Naaman, faithful. Okay, so it's open to homiletical interpretation. So, but in English, sometimes you don't see these nuances that it is open to such interpretation. But it's the fact that it's open to interpretation, just strengthens the argument that it could be interpreted that way. Again, there is an imperative to not discuss it literally if it actually occurred that way. Whereas if the verse was more explicit, so then it could also have canceled out the ability to describe that. Now, just let's take it from the point of view of someone who holds that Esther was only the adoptive daughter of Mordecai, not his wife. Well, if that's the case, and Mordecai was either the direct scribe or in charge of the scribe, why would he allow an interpretation to be open that he married her, had relations with his daughter. I mean, could you even imagine that being possible? You see what I'm saying? So, because of the laws of modesty, it doesn't make sense that it's possible to interpret it uh, that he she was his wife unless she was his wife. You understand? So as far as he could have used more explicit words and to write down to prevent this an alternate interpretation in the Talmud, right? So you see where I'm getting with this, that the fact that he didn't go out of his way to prevent people thinking that he had relations with Esther means that most certainly she was not his just raised as his daughter, right? Otherwise, he would have prevented people from allowing them to think such things about how the greatest scholar of his generation would treat his daughter. You see what I'm saying with that, right? Okay, and last week we already covered. Again, I'll show people who don't yet have an art school, or maybe they have either the art school white or blue editions. So the paragraph you have to check out in the introduction is here in the Esther, a foreign wife, but especially starting from here, Esther and Halacha. So starting from here downward. Yeah, check that out, and or just play back the video in our video archive from last week. Okay.
Sorry,
No,
probably my
that's good.
fault.
You have a question? Do you have a question? Yes or no?
Yeah, I had a question. It's probably my fault. I was playing.
No, that doesn't. Don't.
I was
Just
doing some video that was interrupting the shear. Sorry.
okay. Just concentrate on the share back. That's all.
So
That's the only truth you got.
how could Haman,
Okay,
with
quick.
also Russia, have Vashti dead, who was also another Russia, a Queen Vashti? How can two Rishaim have each other killed?
Well, again, Vashti was not just another person in the palace. She was perhaps the most experienced politician in the kingdom in the in rule of Achashverosh. By Haman getting rid of her, so he instantly elevated himself as a senior advisor. Similarly, and it looks like the vast majority opinion is that Mamuchan was Haman. And again, going according to the way we explained the Targum last week, that Haman also made sure that the other advisors, the six other advisors besides him, were killed off as well. So that therefore he's free of the competition as an alternative advisor. And then we're going to discuss the alternative to become another advisor with Haman, and that's Mordechai. Mordechai is going to enter the discussion. Okay, so let's read the last few verses of chapter 2, starting from verse 21. Big son, Viseresh, Shnei Sarisei Hamelech, Mishomrei Hasaf, ויבקשו לשלוח יד במלך אחשוורוש. ויבודע הדבר למרדכי ויגיד לאסתר המלכה, ותאמר אסתר למלך בשם מרדכי. ויבוקש הדבר וימצא ויתלו שניהם על עץ ויכסב בספר דברי הימים לפני המלך. Okay, please translate through the end of the chapter, verses 21 through 23.
In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Big Thumb and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains of the guardians of the threshold, became engaged and sought to send their hand against King Ahasuerus. The matter became known to Mordecai, who told it to Queen Esther, and Esther informed the king in Mordecai's name. The matter was investigated and found to be true, and they were both hanged on the gallows. It was recorded in the book of Chronicles in the king's presence.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to quote now from the Judaica Press edition. They bring down a translation of the Malbim on this, and it's really fascinating. Okay, so this is Malbim on verse 22. Okay, so on some pages here, you see the Judaica Press English. It goes, they just use extra pages for the English, and they delay using more Hebrew until later on, until they cover all of the points. So in some ways, it's a little bit like the White Edition Tanakh series of Art Scroll. Okay, so here's the Malbim on verse 22. Malbim explains that the discovery of this plot and the execution of the two plotters was a result of a series of miracles. As the rabbis said in Megillah 13b, the Holy One, blessed be He, creates the remedy before the ailment. That's in Hebrew, that's refuah lifnei hamaka. This incident was carefully planned to bring about the redemption of the Jews from their straits. This teaches that the wound is brought about only for its remedy. So, in other words, the wound brought about for its remedy is a bit different than refuah lifnei hamaka. Refuah lifnei hamaka, the remedy before the ailment, means God prepares the cure before He even gives the illness. But saying the Malbim's statement, saying that the wound is brought about only for the remedy, is that, in other words, God wanted to show how much he loves someone, so He made them sick only to heal them and show that much love even more. Okay, but refuah lifnei hamaka, this can be compared to a bloodletter who, prior to letting blood, prepares all the implements necessary to stop the flow of blood and revive the patient. That's refuah lifnei hamaka, the remedy before the ailment. This is a meaning of Exodus 15:26. I will not inflict upon you any of the sicknesses that I inflicted upon the Egyptians, because I, the Lord, am your healer. In other words, I will not inflict any sickness upon you with the same intentions that I inflicted upon the Egyptians. My main intention in smiting the Egyptians was to punish the wicked. I will inflict sickness upon you because I am your healer. With that intention, God prepares the remedy before the wound. God's first preparation was making Esther queen. His second preparation was seating Mordecai in the king's gate. The intention was twofold. One, arouse the jealousy of the sentries, and two, allow Mordecai to learn of the plot against the king. In one way, this caused trouble for Israel, and in one way, it brought about their deliverance. It was therefore a miracle that Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, and it was a miracle that two sentries chosen for the faithfulness to the king should become angry with him and have the audacity to plot his assassination. The third miracle was that God revealed this to Mordecai. Further, Mordecai did not tell Esther to tell the king of the plot in his name, yet she did so of her own volition, her own good character traits. Another miracle was that the poison was discovered despite their efforts to conceal it. Finally, it was a miracle that the king did not immediately reward Mordecai for this great service, but recorded it in his diary. Okay, so recording his diary. So there is another discussion about that. Later on, it's the commentaries will discuss that Haman changed the official records, but the king. It was written here that it was recorded in the king's presence. In other words, the king also recorded it in his diary. So later on, the king is going to discover that Haman was trying to change the history as recorded in the official chronicles to favor himself. So
not even his sons.
Right, no, right. Haman was in his capacity was editing history as he could to make himself look better for whenever the king would look back at records. But the king also kept a diary that perhaps Haman wasn't aware of. And in his diary, he recorded the actual series of events. So the discrepancy is going to later on be important for the king to not trust Haman, and it all came out of because the fact that the king's records show that Mordecai was for sure his true friend. He saved the king from poisoning, and Haman tried to hide that. So therefore, anything Haman would say against the Jew and his people was now become suspect. It all came from this happening that Mordecai was even able to catch these poisoners. So this is another way this story of Esther has so many hidden miracles. It's not that the book of Esther doesn't have miracles; it's they're hidden, so you have to find it. But here is one of the great miracles already that Mordecai was able to catch it, and that the king's scribe was able to record it faster than Haman could change the official records. So the king would have his diary with the accurate history of what happened between Mordecai and those who were trying to kill the king. Fascinating. Okay, so if you have or are getting the Judaica Press, they have several books in one. It's Esther, Songs, and Ruth. If you happen to get this volume, this would be on page 19 in the second chapter of Esther. Okay. All right, so let's at least get chapter 3 started, and then we'll probably pause in the middle of chapter 3 because it's already getting later. But again, chapter 3 is 15 verses. So the thing is this is that we have the time to read chapter 3. Do we have the time to cover all the commentaries? I'm not sure. So I'm not guaranteeing that we can finish chapter 3 tonight, even though it's less than 20 verses. Okay. All right, so let's start chapter 3. See what happens. Everyone game? Okay.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna have a bad day today because
No, you're gonna have a good day.
video playing
I
playing that random Warcraft 3.
don't know.
Human French game
No,
with
we don't have to have a video game discussion at this point.
Good day.
It's okay.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Here we go.
But I'm pretty good.
Only relevant comments. Otherwise, let's not interrupt the class, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Otherwise, I'm gonna have to leave the room.
No, otherwise you have to control yourself.
Otherwise, I'm touching something.
We don't have to discuss unpleasantries. Okay. Very good. Okay, so chapter 3, verse 1. Any lingering questions on chapter 2 before we finish it? Okay, I recommend continuing to study on your own. There's much more that we haven't covered in chapter 2, but the hope is to try to finish it sometime in the next 2 months. I mean, people normally read it twice in every forum, so once finishing it once in 2 months, maybe it's the least we could do. But it's good. I mean, right?
It's a bad thing.
No, it's a good thing. That means we're doing our job.
It's a bad thing. I'm failing.
No, you're not failing. Yeah, it's a good thing that we're going in depth because how many people study this book with such depth? And yet, when you look at the fact that, again, as we mentioned, there's a tractate of the Talmud on it, in addition to the Midrashim. So therefore, there's more commentary on the book of Esther than most books of the Bible. So, and it's a lot more than we've covered. But I think we're on the right track to cover a lot of these hidden gems that perhaps people wouldn't have covered on their own. Okay, everyone, good. We're continuing in chapter 3. Okay. So, Teresa, did you want to continue translating? You're up to it?
Yes, it's fine.
Okay, because it may be only a couple of verses. I'm not sure yet. All right. אחר דבר מאלה, גידל המלך אחשוורוש הסמן, בן המדסה האגגי, וינשאהו, וישם אס כיסו מעל כל השרים אשר איתו. Please translate verse 1. Teresa,
Oh, I'm sorry. It's Russell's fault.
can you translate verse 1?
Yeah, it was my fault, right?
After these things, King Ahasuerus
We still like you.
promoted Haman, son
Libya,
of
we're not racist. We don't hate you.
Yeah,
Hammedatha,
with they're teaching something.
the Agagite, and elevated him. He set his seat above all the
When
officers
they're not talking.
who were with him.
Very good. Okay, so now if you ever heard a Krios Megillah, a reading of the Megillah Esther in a yeshiva or in a Chabad shul, both of them have the same custom uh, to not have lots of sounds and Gregor noises during Haman's name unless it's with the title. So in other words, if somebody has a headache on a given Purim, they should probably look for either a yeshiva or a Chabad house to listen to the Kriyas Megillah, because there's only going to be noise made whenever Haman's name is mentioned with a title. So therefore, in many congregations, here is the first time we actually have the Gregor sounded. The noisemakers are sounded only starting here in chapter 3, verse 1. In such in yeshivas and those kind of environments. Okay, and so I mean, personally, I like to be able to think about the text, so I enjoy hearing a reading in a place like yeshiva or Chabad house more than a place that just has lots of noise, for the kids. So but fortunately, we've been blessed that it's my family's okay with it. We go to these kinds of places, and that's where we hear the Megillah. But only for the sake of the mitzvah, you know, would I even want any kind of noise to be made? But as you know, I'm a person who likes to think about Tanakh, not just read it. So okay, so it works out good for me. So. If you haven't tried it both ways, give both a try, and then see which one you excel at better. Okay. Okay, can you read the first paragraph commentary on verse 1, chapter 3?
After these things, God prepared the way for Israel's future salvation by establishing Mordecai's reputation as the one who saved the king's life. Only after these things did Ashurus elevate Haman. This is from the Torah nation. Haman,
Yeah.
the Agag.
Again,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Let's pause there. Right. So that's an example of Refuah Lifnei Amaka as Malbim was discussing in the quote from Judaic Compass. So yes, can you continue with the commentary?
So Haman the Agag, he was a descendant of Agag, king of Amalek. 1 Samuel 15:9. He was fabulously wealthy, for he stole the treasures of the Judean kings and the temple from Midrash.
Okay, continuing in the Hebrew. וכל עבדי המלך אשר בשער המלך קוראים ומשתחווים להמן כי כן ציווה לו המלך ומרדכי לא יכרע ולא ישתחווה. Please translate verse 2.
All the king's servants at the king's gate would bow down and prostrate themselves before Haman, for so had the king commanded concerning him. But does it go on? Yeah.
Yeah, but
Mordecai would not bow down to prostrate himself.
okay, look at the commentary on the first paragraph.
Would bow down and prostrate themselves. Haman claimed divine powers for himself. Therefore, Mordecai would not bow down or prostrate himself. Rashi. And Haman had the image of an idol fastened it to his clothes, so that whoever bowed to him would be worshiping an idol at the same time. It's Midrash.
Haman
That
was
stupid.
not just stupid. So before he was genocidal, Haman was already a piece of work, as they would
Yeah.
describe it. As they would describe it in these parts,
Why would he do such a stupid thing? It's racist. I don't. I don't want. I don't like being you know
Well, Haman had
language like this. But he's so evil. I wanna hang him on.
Haman had character flaws outside of his genocidal tendencies that already would have made him, like hell bent to end up with a capital punishment. So I mean, this guy was messed up. Okay, but it's amazing. You know, it's just another sign. It doesn't matter where a person comes from. You know, right? Because uh, Darius the was the son of Achashverosh, who according to the sages of the Talmud, they think he's even worse than Haman because he's the one who empowered the genocide. So Achashverosh was the father of the builder of the temple, Darius, right? Whereas Haman, he was a descendant of Esav, who came from some of the most righteous people in history, right? Abraham and Isaac. So uh, a person has to choose good and go away from evil. As Psalm 34, King David recommends, Sur Merav Aseh Tov, go away from evil and do good. Because we see Haman had righteous forefathers, and he did one of the most despicable things in world history. And Darius had one of the most despicable fathers, and he did one of the most righteous things in world history. And it's all here in the same book. It's pretty good.
Which is very racist.
But we'll learn more about Darius in the book of Ezra. Okay. All right, so there's another interesting quote here in the Judaica Press. We're now on Book of Esther, chapter 3, verse 2. Okay, so this quotes the Medrash that talks about Mordechai and Haman being generals in the army together. Did anyone ever hear this Medrash? Okay.
I don't think so.
All right, so Baruch Hashem. Okay, so now this is a nice little quote here. See? From here to the bottom of the page on the right-hand column. This is on page 21 in the Judaica Press Esther. According to Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, chapter 50, Haman embroidered an image on his garments, and when people prostrated themselves before him, they also prostrated themselves to the embroidered image. The Targum paraphrases, and all the servants of the king who were in the gate of the royal palace would kneel to the image that he erected with him and prostrate themselves to Haman, for so had the king commanded concerning him. But Mordecai did not kneel to the image and did not prostrate himself to Haman because Haman was his slave. Haman was Mordecai's slave. How did that work out? Who had been sold to him for a loaf of bread.
Was he his slave, but he was also an idol worshiper.
Well,
That way.
the justice of God is amazing. Even if somebody's an idolater, they don't automatically become a servant to someone else. Becoming a servant or a slave is a transaction that must occur before it to happen. Just because somebody sinned horribly against God, God is so into liberty that he doesn't force people to automatically become slaves. It has to be a separate judgment or transaction. That's the mercy and justice of God. Even an idolater who you think be enemy number one of God, no, he judges every deed separately according to its punishable crime. Okay, so this Targum alludes to the addendum to the Targum. So which relates that in the second year of Ahasuerus's reign, the city of Hindika rebelled against him. I guess Hindi, it's from India. Ahasuerus sent a vast army to subdue it. He appointed Mordecai over one half of the army and Haman over the other half. While Mordecai used his supplies sparingly, Haman squandered them and was left without food, in other words, for his entire troop.
He didn't have a troop.
No,
What a liar.
No, he had a troop, but
he was an idiot.
Right, he was foolish. He didn't ration out his supplies. He just said, "Let's feast, let's feast, let's feast." Okay, and then after a few feasts, there's no more food. The soldiers started to starve.
He was a dwarf, and he was a terrible commander who let his who stole all the food and let his soldiers starve.
I don't know if he was a little person, but that's not a part of the
he was a dwarf
reason.
And a fool, and he
Let's
was a terrible.
Were he a little person, that in and of itself is not a negative
of his own clan.
He
failed the king.
Wait, I don't.
He failed everybody. Listen, and that's how he was.
It's important. Wait, stop.
He was sentenced.
Yeah. The two greatest scholars in the past 100 years, Chofetz Chaim and Moshe Feinstein, were both maybe an inch or two shorter than 5 feet tall. Okay, so being short is not a punishable offense. In fact, some of the holiest people in world history were short people.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. So just I don't know what friends you're hanging out with. I just wanted you to be clear about what the Torah expects you to understand.
I expect to understand.
I mean, what about the tall people, Rabbi?
Well, Moses and Aaron were some of the tallest people in history, so they can be good too. Very good. I think it's people between 5 feet and 6'5" we got to worry about it. But it seems like everybody else is doing pretty good, generally speaking. But but okay, so let me continue the narrative here in Judaica Press. So Haman squandered them and was left without food. He begged Mordecai to lend him some food, which Mordecai refused. He didn't want to risk his own soldiers for Haman's soldiers. They finally agreed Mordecai would give food to Haman and his troops if Haman would sell himself as a slave.
How do they have an army?
No, wait. Tell me. It doesn't say here, but I want to explain to you why Mordecai would insist on this. Why? Because according to law, the slave became instantly subservient to the master, right?
Right.
So therefore, even without a decree from the emperor, which again, there was no telephones back then, not even telegraph machines, right? So therefore, Mordecai would instantly become the senior general. And he could not only suggest a better policy, he could order him. And he knew Haman was a disaster. He was going to get his soldiers killed. The only way Mordecai would be convinced Haman was not going to kill half of the soldiers sent before they even went to battle was that Mordecai would be in charge of all the operation. So I could imagine Mordecai was trying to save. I mean, if I had a choice to have Haman as my slave or not, I would just have him, go to Timbuktu by himself. But no offense to anybody living in Timbuktu. Okay, so
the entire mob country.
Let's be nice.
You racist the entire country.
No, I'm just saying. Haman was a complete disaster. With his decadent lifestyle, he single-handedly allowed half of the army to be depleted all their food and rations before they even could fight the enemy. What a mess! So the only way to save now his own soldiers were on half rations. The entire campaign would be doomed. unless Haman was put under check. So therefore, I think Mordecai felt he had no choice. This is my interpretation, but it seems logical. Mordecai had no choice but to do something to stop Haman, and he's not a murderer, so make him a slave. Now we see.
But he also became one when he attempted to murder the entire Jewish nation.
Okay, but again, so we see Haman rose to power in Persia after, according to this, he was a slave. So we see Mordecai was not a taskmaster. He didn't lord over Haman because he technically was a slave. He didn't even think about it. He was just trying to save the soldiers. If Mordecai was really trying to make a transaction here and benefit himself, so this story would be talking about how Haman's rebelling against Mordecai. But this is just like an anecdote. You have to go to the Medrash for. It's not even discussed in Tanakh. But this helps us to understand why Mordecai wouldn't bow to Haman, right? He's a complete mess, and by law, Haman has to bow to him, not the other way around. Okay, so let's continue the Medrash quoted here. The document attesting to the sale was written on Mordecai's shoe, not a lot of available parchment on the field of battle, which he would show Haman whenever he passed by. So when Haman would look at him expectantly, waiting for Mordecai to bow, Mordecai would just point down to his shoe. Remember, you're a slave, without embarrassing him in public. Could you imagine how nice Mordecai was? Haman
and in the Queen of Persia movie, it said it written down by Haman. He said to Mordecai, said to Mordecai through the shoe that he written down his soul promise that he broke. I am your slave.
Yeah, but Haman wanted to hide from it. He was just trying to get honor for himself. He didn't want to even think about it. Then he did that. But just Haman was one of the worst examples of humans in history.
It was worse than Waluigi.
Comparable to stuff that people flush in toilets in some ways. Let's put it that way.
In some ways, it was worse than every single cartoon character I've seen in a movie.
So this guy Haman, he's a real mess, and so imagine just having this guy demanding somebody bow to him after he sold himself as a slave to him. Nevertheless, despite how worthless Haman was in the grand scheme of things, Mordecai didn't embarrass him in public. He just pointed down to his shoe for the inside joke, or inside not joke, but the inside rebuke. So he treated Haman like a brother. Now, why would he do that? Because again, the whole, for example, if you're familiar with history of the African slave trade, nothing to do with the slavery from the Torah. Torah, the master has to give his pillow to his slave. If there's only one pillow in the house, the slave gets the pillow. He's like a permanent house guest, not a slave as we understand it, post-Western civilizations enslavement of Africans. So, in other words, Mordecai was treating him in a noble Torah manner. So we using the English word slave is, it doesn't explain the whole thing. He was a indentured servant to Mordecai, and therefore, as his servant, Mordecai refused to embarrass him in public. The same piece of blank that Haman was, Mordecai would not embarrass him in public. How about that? How about that for the mitos tovos of the Torah?
Mm-hmm. What a piece
and no, just think about the holiness. Mordecai was a prophet of God, and not only expert of oral Torah, the founder of the Men of the Great Assembly, which led to the Talmudic times.
Okay, but
So
he
it's,
was
wait,
a piece
and
of
but Mordecai was Mordecai was a paragon of virtue, even towards one of the greatest enemies of the Jewish people ever.
Yeah, but he couldn't even try to keep all the seven missiles of B'nai Noach.
So now,
That crazy man Hama.
So wait. So this is the question now. If those who would want to dispute this medrash, now what if Haman was not Mordechai's slave? Would Mordechai then have called him names? Because he was so evil. You understand? So this story, this medrash, it's kind of a hidden medrash because it's not even mentioned in the article. We have to go to another book to get this story. It explains a lot, but it also reveals the nobility we find in the oral Torah that is epitomized by Mordechai. He wouldn't even embarrass the greatest. In some ways, from a conjecture perspective, he was the greatest enemy of the Jewish people in history was Haman, because he wanted to kill every single Jew. The leader of the Nazis only wanted to kill the Jews in his domain. So Haman was worse than in the sense of what he planned to do. The leader of the Nazis was worse in what he actually did do. So, but from evil thoughts, there's nobody as evil as Haman, right? Nobody evil as Haman, and Mordecai did not want to make him feel bad. Wow. Okay. That's all I'm saying. Wow.
But that's retarded.
No,
No,
no, that's holy. That's not retarded.
How it's retarded that of Sonic is friends and neighbors with Russia.
No, he's not friends and neighbors. He was quietly telling him, by the way, you have to bow to me. And Haman would stop trying to make Mordecai bow to his idol.
I wasn't talking about him. I was talking about someone else being.
Okay, well, no, keep your comments, please, on track with whatever we're discussing, because that's a little distracting.
I'm talking about a different Sonic who was friends and neighbors of Russia because that's stupid.
Okay, generally speaking, that right? Concept, right? That concept would be a stupid thing, generally speaking. It's wise to serve God. And it's beautiful and merciful and everything, and it's foolish to not serve God, and it's cruel and unwise, as well. So,
and it's abhorrent to serve Russia and not God and not Sonic.
Abhorrent, correct, from that. But it's just, to me, it's just wow. I mean, this is the way you have. If the world is filled with Torah scholars like Mordechai, wow. Even wicked people wouldn't even risk embarrassing a wicked person. So it's like half. Have you noticed the rhetoric online has been even more slanderous than it was 12 years ago? Like even people who should know better, right? They keep talking about uh, like this guy destroys that woke person in this video, right? Destroying a woke person, shaming someone in public is not a Torah goal. It's not the way of the oral Torah. So I think this is one of the big differences we're going to see. Besides, of course, avoiding smut and extraneous violence and stuff like that. Just that people won't try to rejoice at the downfall of others. And remember, in Proverbs, it talks about not even rejoicing at the downfall of your enemy. So, but we see that fulfilled uh, ideally by Mordecai, and that's so very beautiful. Any comments or questions? But Haman Haman, he only listened to the most recent law, right? So Haman still became enraged when Mordecai wouldn't bow to him, even though he was a slave. He said, "Oh, that's old news, right? That was just so I could get food." But
When people act stupid like an orc, that's when
okay, so now, well,
judgment strikes down lightning on your head.
so now the Judaica Press quotes further in Al-Sheikh. So Al-Sheikh makes an important point here. Um, Haman saw that indeed Mordecai did not bow or prostrate himself before him. He became filled with rage. Nevertheless, he had no right to execute Mordecai because Mordecai had not disobeyed the royal edict. Okay, so in other words, he commanded everybody. But he didn't make a special command for other officers. Since Mordecai was an officer, therefore he was not under that categorization. There's another commentary that believes that Mordecai did violate the commandment, but he didn't violate it enough, in other words, to be arrested or anything like that. So Haman had to come up with another way around it. So but Haman's solution was a final solution for an entire race: genocide. Okay, let's continue in the text. Can we go a little bit longer, guys? Everyone okay with it?
We're here till you leave.
Well, again, most of our viewers are watching this after we record it, so therefore they could take a break and come back to it if necessary. But
Rabbi,
yes,
how far do you want to go? I'm willing to go, man. I'm in this. I made a pledge and a commitment. So let's do this thing.
yeah, but it's just you see there's lots of oral Torah on this book, so therefore
It's just, I
because
made a
I'm
pledge
my
and let's do this thing.
again my goal is to not do what they do in the synagogues because you don't need my help for that. I want to do what they don't do in the synagogues, which is go in depth. But again, I'm not covering every comment in Art Scroll even or Judaica Press. I'm just covering certain issues that are related to other issues that could help you understand the oral Torah behind Tanakh better. I believe. So, all right. So
Thank
let's. There's not as much commentary to cover on this chapter in the second half. So let's continue for now. But
Yes.
Rabbi, I think you got me muted.
yeah, I estimate we have no less than another 8 hours. It could be 16 hours of class time before we finish this book. So therefore, we are not going past chapter 3 tonight. I hope you don't mind. But let's try to do a few more verses at least. Okay, so we finished the first two verses, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a sign of a good class for a class trying to go study Be'iyun in depth. So we're doing a good job if we only cover two verses in a long time.
Not a class that's failing my boss.
So no, we're doing good.
We're efficient. We're not failing.
Oh, thank God. Right.
If we were failing, I would quit.
Darling. Okay, so verse 3 in chapter 3. Vayomeru avdei hamelech asher b'shar hamelech leMordechai madua ata over es mitzvas hamelech Vahib ka'amram elav yom v'yom v'lo shama alehem vayagidu lahaman liros hayam du divrei Mordechai ki higid lahem asher hu Yehudi. Vayar Haman ki ein Mordechai korea umishtacha ve'lo v'yimalei Haman pema v'yivez beinav lishloach yad b'Mordechai levado ki higidu lo es am Mordechai ve'vakesh Haman lahashmid es kol haYehudim asher b'chol malchus Achashverosh am Mordechai. L'chodesh Rishon hu chodesh Nisan yishnas shteim esrei lamelech Achashverosh. He peeled poor hu hagoral lifnei Haman miyom liyom mechodesh lechodesh shnei masar hu chodesh adar. Okay, please translate verses 3 through 7.
So the king's servants who were at the king's gate said to Mordecai, "Why do you disobey the king's command?" Now it happened when they said this to him day after day, and he did not heed them, they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would prevail, for he had told them that he was a Jew. When Haman himself saw that Mordecai did not bow down and prostrate himself before him, Haman was filled with wrath. However, it seemed contemptible to him to send his hand against Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai. So Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the entire kingdom of Ahasuerus, the people of Mordecai. In the first month, which is the month of Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, would cast a lot her in Haman's presence for day to day and from month to month to the 12th month, which is the month of Adar.
Okay, so the commentary on verse 4. Please translate. I'll read that.
They told Haman to see whether Mordecai's words would prevail. At first, they thought he was a non-Jew, so there was no reason for him not to bow. But when he informed them that he was a Jew, he could never prostrate himself idolatrously. Rashi. They despised him and reported him to Haman. Others say that they hated Haman's demeaning behavior towards them, and they reported Malachi as a test. Mordecai as a test case to see whether Mordecai's words would prevail. If his actions were tolerated, they too would refuse to bow.
From the Medrash Miamlays. So now, why would Mordechai use this as an excuse? Remember, Esther didn't say she was married, don't take her, because they knew they were going to ignore the marriage, being a married woman, as a reason to not be kidnapped for the king's harem. So, but Mordechai mentioned he was a Jew because implicitly there was respect for religion. And indeed, remember, previous king Cyrus the Great said the Jews had the international recognition of a right to build a temple in their homeland. That's pretty amazing. So therefore, people didn't have rights to their own wives in that in the crazy kingdom, but they had a right to their religion, unless, of course, it was a situation like this, where this suddenly the entire populace of the religion would disappear overnight. So it was tough times in Persia, but there are noble aspects of the Persian Empire as well, as we see from Cyrus the Great and Darius the Persian. Okay. But that's the reading comprehension. Why would he even mention he's a Jew unless it has a chance to succeed, that's a legitimate excuse to not vow? right? You see? So you could think about that whenever you read the Tanakh, even before you get into a commentary. Why would he say that now? It must be that that could be an excuse. Okay, let's continue in verse 8. ויאמר המן למלך אחשוורוש ישנו עם אחד מפוזר ומפורד בין העמים בכל מדינות מלכותך ודעשיהם שונות מכל עם ודעשי המלך אינם עושים למלך אין שווה להניחם אם על המלך טוב יכסב לעבדם ו10,000 כיכר כסף אשכול על ידי עושי המלאכה להביא על גנזי המלך. Okay, can you translate, please, through verse 9, 8 through 9?
Then Haman said to King Assuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your reign. These laws are different from every other people's, and
Their laws.
their laws
Mhm.
Are different from every other people's, and they do not observe the king's laws. Therefore, it is not befitting the king to tolerate them. If it pleases the king, let it be recorded that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 silver talents into the hands of those who perform the duties for deposit in the king's treasury.
Pause there for a second. Okay, so 10,000 silver talents is a huge amount. 10,000 talents is several tons of silver. So he was going to give tons of silver to finance the execution of the entire nation. And all right, so let's continue. In verse 10, Vayasar Hamelach Estabato Meal Yado Vayitana Lahaman ben Hamadasa Hagagid Tzorer HaYehudim Vemer Hamelach Lahaman Hakesef Nasun Lach Vamla Sosbo Katov Meinecha. Please translate 10 and 11.
So the king removed his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, enemy of the Jews. Then the king said to Haman, the silver is given to you, the people also, to do what as you see fit, to do with as you see fit.
So he couldn't even he didn't even accept a bribe. Achashverosh now is a complete partner in the genocide. He said he'll finance the destruction of the people instead. So any thought that Achashverosh was not evil, because he liked a Jewish girl or whatever, that's kind of out the window right here. He wouldn't even take a tremendous, not just a little amount, many tons of silver. He would not accept, and he would deplete his own treasury a bit for the sake of Haman's whim. And he didn't even investigate it. He didn't have a trial, nothing. So it's hard to fully comprehend Ahasuerus's thinking capacity. Everything was a whim. He but to agree to genocide on a whim is one of the most terrifying things in world history. And all right, so let's continue. Verse 12. Vikru Sofrei Hamelach B'chodesh Harishon V'Shlosha Asar Yom Bo V'Yikasev K'chol Asher Tziva Haman El Achash Dar Pnei Hamelach Ves Hapachos Asher Al Medina U'Medina Ve'el Sarei Am Va'am Medina U'Medina Ki Chesava Va'am Va'am Ki Lashono V'Shem Hamelach Achashverosh Nichtav Nechtam V'Tabas Hamelach V'Nishloach Safarim Biad Haratzim El Kol Medinos Hamelach Lahashmin La'arog Ul'Abed Es Kol HaYudim Minar V'Ad Zaken Taf Nashim Biyom Echad B'Shlosh Asar Chodesh L'Chodesh Shneim Asar Hu Chodesh Adar U'Shlalam Lavos Pas Shegen Hakasav L'Hinasen Das B'Chol Medina U'Medina Galoi L'Chol Ha'amim Lios Asidim L'Yom Hazeh V'Ratzim Yatz'u D'Chufim B'Devar HaMelech V'Hadas Nitana B'Shushan Habira V'Hamelech V'Haman Yashvu Lishtos V'Er Shushan Navocha. Okay, please translate through the end of the chapter, verses 12 through 15.
The king's scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and everything was written exactly as Haman had dictated to the king's satraps. Satraps. What does that word mean?
Like a senior,
Advisor.
like a senior governor,
Okay.
high vizier.
Thank you. To the governor who were over every province, and to the officials of every people, to each province in its own script, and to each person in its own language. It was written in the name of King Ahasuerus, and it was sealed with the king's signet ring. Letters were sent by courier to all the provinces of the king to destroy, to slay, to exterminate all the Jews, from young to old, children and women, in one day on the 13th of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. Copies of the document were to be promulgated in every province and be published to all peoples for them to be prepared for that day. The couriers were sent hurriedly by order of the king, and the edict was distributed in Shushan, the capital. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was bewildered.
Sirius and Haman sat down and they had a drink while people were confused. Let's read the comment, the last paragraph. But the city of Shushan was bewildered. Can you go to that commentary?
But the city of Shushan was bewildered. The Jews cried and wailed loudly, while the Persians rejoiced. Listeners were bewildered, trying to differentiate between the cries of anguish and the shouts of joy. Wow.
Okay, so now a majority of the Persians were not rejoicing. So it's not clear from this translation, but it was a segment of the Persians were rejoicing. Now, remember, as far as how the story ends up, is that they come up with a ridiculous rule that they cannot reverse a decree by a Persian emperor. So therefore, they have to, instead of repealing the call of genocide, gives the Jews the right to kill anybody who threatens them, before the date of the permission to kill the Jews occurred. Crazy law, but so that's how this will be resolved. But it's just obviously there wouldn't have been enough time for the Jews to kill all the Persians. What a crazy king. And he wouldn't have made such a law if we're talking about a majority of his subjects, right? I mean, just think about it. He wants wealth, and people are sources of wealth if there are taxes. So when we say the Persians in the commentary here in the English, we're talking about a vast minority, right? A vast minority of the Persians were threatening the Jews, but they became vocal anti-Semites over the course of the next 11 months. So the Jews knew exactly where the danger was coming from. They kept repeatedly being insulted over and over again. But it had to be that the vast majority of the Persians were not involved in excitement about the Jews dying. Otherwise, Ahasuerus would have just destroyed all of his taxpayers, which even a king as flighty as Ahasuerus would not do such a thing. Make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I mean, I think that's one of the most important things. Anybody could comment if they're teaching this chapter.
That's true.
Okay, all right. Any questions before we call it an evening?
Now, according to this commentary, it seems like they started killing them before, because it said that, all of a sudden women would fall off the top of the roof while they're doing the clothes, and men would drop.
Oh, okay, yeah, okay. So read that one, but you have to understand the one what that Madras is talking about is the Persians started to have extremely bad luck. The Persians who hated the Jews started to die miraculously. It wasn't people were hunting each other. Okay, so yeah, read that. Yeah.
It said, scarcely had the edict been promulgated when all sorts of misfortunes began to happen to Persians. When women hanging out their wash on the roofs of their houses fell to their death, men drawing water fell into the wells and drowned, while Asherus and Haman were making merry. The city was thrown into
Consternation.
and mourning.
So Cyrus and Haman were having a party while the people who were on their side in the genocide were dying miraculously. Oh gosh, God has an incredible sense of humor. But I mean, what? I mean, even okay. So logically, it has to be a minute percentage, not the best, even a majority, or even a significant minority. Otherwise, Ahasuerus wouldn't permit the decimation of his tax base. But what psychos these people were, rejoicing at the sound of a decree worse than anything the Nazis ever decreed. Not just kill the people in their reach, but kill every last one alive from that race. What sick psychos! And they didn't have to be from Edomites, right? Amalekites. They're just sick people into that, and so this teaches us something about anti-Semitism. It there's a capacity for humans, even if they're not from the Amalekites, to achieve a level of degradation where they rejoice at the thought of genocide. Right? I mean, it's just such a profound lesson. Wow. Okay, so it's a difficult topic to cover, but the fact that without um without anybody to save them, God found a way to save them, and it's going to be revealed as we continue to study this book. And
Yeah.
it's really amazing thing. But again, according to, as I said previously last week, some Christian scholars try to leave the book of Esther out of the scripture. And well, if someone is potentially anti-Semitic, I can see why. The hidden hand of God is so revealed in this book more than in most books of the Bible.
Mhm.
Who wants to mess with the Jewish people, even in the time when the decree of death was on them, miracles were happening to avenge them. So it's just it doesn't pay to be an enemy of the Jews. I mean,
All right.
yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Rabbi. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks everyone, and Hashem bless you. Continue your studies, and hope we can learn more in the future as well. God
Thank you,
bless.
Rabbi Friedlander. Good night. Thank you.
Good night. Thank you. Bye. Be well. Shabbat tov.